About 4.5 years ago, we got the F-4C and the MiG-21 in War Thunder, and since then, the addition of new top-tier jets has only gotten faster and faster. Around a year or so ago, Gaijin confirmed that they eventually plan to add 5th generation aircraft into the game. This is probably something we should have foreseen would eventually come as soon as they started adding supersonic jets and different weapons like IR missiles and radar missiles. Also, if you're here for the giveaway, don't worry about that, I'll get to it in just a minute. I will be trying to lay out my reasoning for when I expect 5th gens to be added along with a general timeline. I also highly doubt that Gaijin themselves know when they plan to add these planes, but they may have a general idea. We know from the past that they don't really have a solid plan for more than a year out at most, and a lot of the stuff comes down to the last minute, which we've seen as recent as the last few updates. But again, I think I'll be able to roughly predict it based on the last couple of years worth of planes and weapons additions. But there are going to be a bunch of requirements that I think will be needed before aircraft like the F-22 or Su-57 are able to be added. Now, for those of you who are here for the giveaway, I will be giving away 2,500 GE since I recently reached 1,000 subscribers. I'd like to thank everyone that subscribed. I really didn't think it would be this fast after my last video, but here we are. If you would like to win the GE, you must be from the United States, since unfortunately you're still not able to give GE to people with a different currency than you. Please make sure you're subscribed and leave a comment including your War Thunder username. The winner will be chosen on May 29th, and I will reply to your comment letting you know that you won. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I do hope that you stay and enjoy the rest of this, let's say, analysis. Also, one last thing before I get into everything else, I would like to thank my channel members. Thank you to Highlight 132, Jack Thomas, and Freezing Cold in Tier 1, and thank you to Creamy in Tier 3. Thank you all for supporting this channel. Now, I'll start by establishing a timeline as to when new planes and weapons were added so I can explain my line of thinking. Both the US and Russia typically have new airframes added alongside each other and then have later variants added over time. The other nations are unfortunately less consistent with the addition of new airframes or variants, so I will be basing this section off of these two nations alone. Starting back in September of 2019 with the addition of the F-4C and MiG-21 F-13, they were both initially added with early Fox 2 missiles, the AIM-9B and E for the F-4C, and the R-3S for the MiG-21 F-13. Later on, we got the MiG-21 SMT in December of 2019 with R-60s. Note that I'm mentioning the weapons too, which will be pretty important since the 5th gens won't be added without equivalent weapons. Similar to the MiG-21 SMT, the F-4E was added in March of 2020 with better weapons than its previous variant, the AIM-9J. Now, so far all of these planes were added without radar missiles, but in September of 2020, the AIM-7D and E were added alongside the R-3R to their respective aircraft, as well as the R-530 for the Mirage 3. As for more new missiles, the R-13M1 and the R-60M were added on the MiG-21 BIS that was introduced just a few months after the radar missiles in November of 2020. In June of 2021, we saw the MiG-23M added with the R-23 missiles, as well as the F-5E for the US. In October of 2021, the MiG-23 MLD was introduced with the further improved R-24R and T. In December of 2021, the US got the F-4J, and while it wasn't the best fighter, it did receive the AIM-7F, which gave the US a good edge against the R-24R. Later on, the F-14 was added in June of 2022, which gave the US an even bigger edge. The F-14A early got the AIM-9H, the AIM-7F, and the AIM-54A, which introduced an entirely new type of missile, active radar homing. This part is interesting as it will have been 2 years by the time any entirely new Fox 3s are added, but I don't think this will affect the speed at which later Fox 3s will be added once we get the initial AMRAAM and R-77s, as well as other missile variants. Starting to get into even more modern aircraft, the F-16A and the MiG-29-913 were both added in Update Apex Predators in December of 2022. The ADF variant of the F-16A received both the AIM-7M and the AIM-9L, which was the first time the AIM-9L was found on a US fighter. The AIM-7M was essentially just an AIM-7F in terms of War Thunder, so not a ton changed there. But the MiG-29 was introduced with the R-60M, the R-27R, and the R-27T. These base R-27s were initially worse than the R-24s, so it really wasn't a huge improvement. However, the MiG-29 did receive a helmet-mounted sight, which gave it a bit of an advantage not just when firing the R-27T and R-60M, but also when using the ACM HMD mode. However, due to the R-27R being very lackluster versus the AIM-7M, the R27ER was very quickly added to the MiG-29 and immediately threw it on top in terms of BVR. In June of 2023, the US got the F-14B, which of course received guided ground ordnance, but also received the AIM-7M, the AIM-9L, and the AIM-54C. In the update immediately after, the F-16C, Block 50, and the MiG-29 SMT were both added to their respective nations. As you can see, the additions of these new top aircraft seem to have started speeding up over time, and so have their weapons. The F-16C received the AIM-7M and the new AIM-9M, which was the first US missile to have IRCCM. At the same time, the MiG-29 SMT received the R-27ER, the R-27ET, and the R-73. The MiG-29 SMT was the first fighter to receive the R-73, and it was significantly better than the R-60M in every way. But the R-27ET was also way better than the R-27T. Then again, just a few months later in December, Gaijin added the Su-27S and the F-15A to War Thunder. Neither of these received entirely new weapons, as the Su-27S got the R-73, R-27ER, and R-27ET, whereas the F-15A received the AIM-7M and the AIM-9M, so while there weren't any new missiles added this update, these new airframes add to the growing number of other top-tier jet fighters. They do also add to the possibility of new variants of these airframes that could be added as early as this next coming update. Now that I've bored you with a brief history of War Thunder, we can start getting into what this means for the future. As we take a look at this timeline, you should be able to see that new airframes were added for each nation in 2019, 2021, 2022, and 2023. New variants of these planes were added in 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. So taking a look at the last 3 years, you can see that they have been adding a new airframe for each nation at a rate of about one per year. The time during the year varied, but for the last 2 years, the new aircraft were added at the end of the year. You may be saying to yourself, or even furiously typing away in a comment, but wait, weren't the F-104 and Yak-38 among other things added in 2020? And while you would be correct, I personally don't consider them as top-of-the-line jet fighters when it comes to the game, and are more like filler aircraft, again, as it comes to the game. And as much fun as they can be, they just aren't on the same level as the Phantom and MiG-29 and all the other planes I've mentioned so far. As for the missiles, new variants of existing missiles were typically added with each new aircraft. But when it came to adding an entirely new type of missile, they were generally added on a new aircraft as well as back added to existing planes. We could see this when AIM-9Bs were first added, and some older aircraft in War Thunder ended up receiving them, though some took time. We also saw this exact same thing when Fox 1s were first added. The Sparrows were added to the Phantoms, which were already in the game by that point, and with the Phoenixes, they were the first active radar homings or Fox 3 missile of their kind. But at the time, I don't believe there were any other aircraft that could get other Fox 3s, and they have yet to add the others, though we know that they are coming to various aircraft in the next update, so it will still follow the pattern of being back added. Now, this will be covering all three types of missiles so that we can see the new variants of these missiles, or new missiles entirely in this category, will continue to be added in the future. At this point, we should have enough information to reasonably predict when the 5th generations can come. So of course there'll be other factors like much better radars among other technologies, but these have also been getting better in general alongside new aircraft. Personally, I think either new airframes or variants may come with this next update, as that's usually what happens when new missiles are added, though there is also the possibility that there may be no new airframes or variants for the US or Russia at least, as this is a bit of a different style, though Germany is all but guaranteed to get the F-4F ICE as they don't have any other Fox 3 slingers, and Japan will likely need a later F-15J as the current one in game cannot use AMRAAM, though they could swap the radar on it for one which would allow for the use of the AIM-120. I would expect the F-A-18 to come later this year, as well as at least one more F-15 variant, the F-15C. As for Russia, I think they will likely get the Su-27SM, which will allow for the use of the R-77. We could potentially see other aircraft from the Flanker series this year, but I'm not entirely sure which one we could see, and we're probably more likely to see it next year. I also think that we could see the MiG-29M or K later this year for the Russians, which will provide an even greater upgrade. It would provide a total of 8 hardpoints instead of 6, as well as better engines among a few other things. In terms of better weapons, we could see better AMRAAMs like the AIM-120C later this year, as well as the R-77-1, though something I would like to see at some point would be the R-27EA, which is essentially a Fox 3 R-27ER with a seeker that is similar to that of an R-77, though it is a bit longer range. Next year it would get a bit different though. Starting with the aircraft, the US really doesn't have any new top airframes that they could get, so I think that next year will be a big one overall for variants of existing aircraft, even for other nations. Stepping outside of the US and Russia for just a second, we may see the addition of planes like the Eurofighter Typhoon and the Rafale to War Thunder most likely towards the end of next year. We could see them a bit earlier, but these planes can be pretty advanced depending on what types of weapons they give them. In my opinion, the US will probably get the F-15E sometime around next year, maybe the beginning of the year, and they could see the F-15EX as soon as the end of 2025, if not even later. The Super Hornet will probably also be added sometime next year, depending on when they want to add some of the other weapons that it could use. For Russia, if we don't see it this year, we will likely see a few more variants of the MiG-29 like the MiG-29M or K most likely, alongside other Su-27 variants or further developments like the Su-30 or 33 or any of the others really. We could also see the MiG-35 introduced, but depending on who you ask, it's just a later development of the MiG-29. We may also see even better Fox 3s next year, and if we don't see the AIM-120C and R-77-1 later this year, we will certainly see them sometime next year. Going into 2026, I suspect we will see even more variants of aircraft in the beginning of the year, and we will likely see 5th generations as soon as the end of 2026. I really don't see them coming any sooner than this, but they definitely could come later. This seems to generally match up with their rate of adding aircraft, as you can see from this chart that I've been throwing on the screen. I also think that we're more likely to see more advanced missiles around the time that these planes come, likely the AIM-120D and R-77M. These may even come with the update that the 5th gens come. I think a big question people have is how will the 5th gens be balanced, since not everyone can get them, right? Well, that's where you're wrong. While you may take a look at a nation like France and note that they don't currently have any 5th gens, you also have to think about how they're getting the Benelux subtree soon. This will allow them to receive the F-35, and other nations will get their respective 5th gens. I think there are two ways that could go into it in terms of adding these planes, and by two ways I mean two almost identical ways, but both that will piss off US mains. Both of these include giving everyone a 5th gen obviously. The J-20 would probably be what is initially added for China, as well as the Su-57 for Russia. For Britain, Germany, Italy, France, Japan, Israel, and Sweden, they would all get the F-35 as their 5th gen stealth fighter. France and Sweden getting it as a courtesy of their subtrees, of course, with the Swedish getting it from the Finnish subtree and the French getting it from the joint upcoming Benelux subtree. Where it could go two ways is when you get to the US. I could see them either adding a variant of the F-35 for the US or adding the F-22. Quite literally, no matter what Gaijin does in this case, a bunch of US mains will be upset as usual. With the F-22 and no F-35, people would be mad that all these other nations got the F-35 before the US did, and if they got the F-35, others would be mad that the F-22 didn't come yet, and they didn't get their even better air superiority fighter. I think if I had to choose which one Gaijin will decide to do, I'd probably say they will go the route of giving the US and most everyone else the F-35. This is the point where we are starting to reach a pretty big uniformity among trees, especially as we add these new subtrees. While on a personal level, I'm not the biggest fan of this, as I prefer to see different aircraft separated by nations. It is overall better for the players, but I don't really see how they have a choice down the line. After we do reach 5th gens, I'm not quite sure what else there is to add after that, other than to go back and add different variants or weapons that were missed. I also do hope that by the time we get around to the F-35s and Su-57s, the game has gone through enough changes to be ready for this. I wouldn't even mind if I was off by years and we had to wait until 2028 or even longer, as long as it will have a bearable game loop. With the current state of the game, I think that stealth fighters with super long range missiles not just could, but would be the most cancerous thing we've ever seen in War Thunder, and while I am excited for these planes and future weapons, I just hope that Gaijin really thinks hard before adding them so it isn't done in a way that makes things worse than they already are. The gameplay and the game mode itself will likely need to be fundamentally different than it is now, unless you just want to take off and immediately fire weapons 10 seconds after your wheels leave the ground. All that is a lot to think about, but I hope my, what you may say, analysis was decent enough. I absolutely think that I could be right about the timeline on 5th gens, but it is Gaijin and they aren't the most predictable. Like I said earlier, they likely don't even know when they plan to add them, though they could get a general idea. I personally think that they have zero idea of what they're doing more than maybe a year out, but again, like I said, they usually play it down to the wire anyways, and don't always know what's coming until right before the update. If you guys did enjoy this video and haven't already hit those like and subscribe buttons, it would be really helpful. Also, don't forget to comment your War Thunder username below if you would like to enter to win the 2500 GE.